Chapter 18. An Explosion. Kiabu continued to complain bitterly of the unseemly doings at Kaluakua. Those visitors played some crazy game in the garden and ruined some of my rare plants, he cried out in despair. And Mr. Sakamaki was so proud of his flowers. Nancy was indignant. Her thoughts traveled to Mr. Gerald. Why had he permitted this? Was he too ill to object? Why had he not sent for a replacement? It occurred to her that possibly Mr. Gerald was not as ill as he seemed to be, that he was using this method to allay any suspicion on the part of the guests at Kaluakua, and actually was watching them very intently. Nevertheless, she offered to return to the estate at once. "That will not be necessary, Miss Nancy," Kiabu said. "We will manage somehow." "Do you think," Nancy questioned, "that Roy Chatley's guests are searching for something?" "No, I do not," Kiabu replied. "I just think they are here to have a good time, but they have very bad manners." "In any case, we'll be home late tomorrow," Nancy promised. "If things get too bad, I suggest you call the police." After the young sleuth hung up, she kept wondering whether or not she had made the right decision in not going directly home. When she discussed it with the others in her group, they urged Nancy to go to the island of Hawaii to see the angel birds. Moki and a friend of his drove them to the airport in 2 cars. "I have a friend in Hawaii who is a fine guide as well as taxi driver," Moki told them. "When you arrive at the airport in Hilo, ask for Kiaka." "We'll do that," said Ned. "Thanks, Moki." Upon their arrival at Hilo 3/4 of an hour later, Nancy and Ned questioned the taxi drivers until they found Kiaka. He was a small, dark, pleasant man about 40 years of age. "Yes, I can take you for a trip at once and give you as much time as you like," he said. "I am grateful to my friend Moki for sending you to me." Learning that they would be able to stay only until the following afternoon, he suggested a general sightseeing tour at once. They could stay overnight at the Volcano House and take a look at Mauna Loa the next morning. Kiaka's car was a station wagon, so there was plenty of room for everyone. Part of the luggage was strapped to the roof. Then everyone got in. "Have you ever heard of our fern forest?" Kiaka asked. Ned said that he had read that the ferns were really as high as trees. Kiaka laughed. "You shall judge for yourself," he answered, and drove off. The city of Hilo itself was a busy place, with a fine harbor where steamers unloaded all types of freight. One of the most interesting sections of the waterfront was the bulk sugar storage plant. Kiaka suggested that they look round inside. He led the way into the building and up a twisting flight of iron steps. At the top was a catwalk from which one could look down into the huge sugar storage vats. "This place can receive more than 300 tons of sugar an hour and can load freighters at the rate of 600 tons an hour," their guide told them. "Astounding," remarked Hannah Gruen. 2 of the bins were filled with brown raw sugar, which Kiaka said would be refined in California. The other bins were empty. "You could practically set the Empire State Building from New York City in one of these," George remarked. "You sure could," Bert agreed. Then, grinning, he said, "I'd say this is the sweetest place on earth." The others smiled, and Bess commented, "Also one of the hottest. Let's go. I'd prefer the cool fern forest." Kiaka drove them through attractive residential sections and finally out of town. Soon the car began to climb, and after a time reached a road running directly through a forest area made up almost exclusively of giant ferns. "They really are as tall as trees!" Bess cried out excitedly. "Oh, let's get out and take some pictures." "Watch out for snakes," Mrs. Gruen warned. "That won't be necessary," the guide spoke up. "There are no poisonous land snakes on these islands." Hannah sighed in relief, and the sightseers alighted. They walked a short distance into the forest. The giant ferns were surprisingly sturdy, And George, with a chuckle, said, "Gosh, what a fan one of these would make." The group snapped some interesting pictures of the giant ferns. Then Kiaka suggested they go on. At times, they passed through forests of trees and ferns, and at other times through open country. Finally, after a long, gradual climb, the road brought them to a large green plateau. "We are in the Kilauea crater now," the guide announced. Presently, he stopped the car at the side of the road and suggested that the passengers follow him. He headed for a spot where they could see steam issuing from the ground. "I'll show you some burning water," he said mysteriously. "Burning water?" Bess repeated. Kiaka smiled but did not explain further. Soon the group reached a circular pit in the ground about 6 feet in diameter. Through the drifting steam, the tourists could see water several feet below. "Ooh, this smells horrid," said Bess. "Sure does," Dave agreed. Kiaka smiled but made no comment. From his pocket, he took a book of matches and lighted one. "Here goes," he called, still grinning. "Look out, everybody." He threw the match down into the water. Instead of being extinguished, the flame instantly caused a small explosion. The group fell back in dismay as yellow and red flames shot up a distance of some 6 inches above the ground. "Why, that's dangerous!" Hannah cried out. Nancy laid an affectionate arm around the woman's shoulders. "I'm sure Kiaka wouldn't do it if it were dangerous." Turning to the guide, she saw that he was lighting another match. This too he threw down into the water. Once more there was an explosion and flames shot up. "What causes such a reaction?" Ned asked him. Kiaka explained that hydrogen sulfide gas was being formed continuously below the Earth's surface and found its escape with the steam. It ignited when fire came in contact with the fumes. "Is gas part of what starts an eruption?" Ned inquired. "Yes. Gases are contained in the seething, boiling, molten rock underground. After a while, if they cannot find any release, pressure is built up. When this becomes too great, an eruption occurs, which happens now and then over on Mauna Loa. But round here there are so many events in the ground that the gas has no trouble getting out." Bess looked a little puzzled. "You mean that the pressure of the gases forces the molten rock to burst out of the earth, and that's how volcanoes erupt?" "Exactly," the guide replied. "If you're lucky, you may see an eruption on Mauna Loa while you're here." "Oh, I hope not," Bess said fearfully. "We might be buried under that scorching lava." Kiaka laughed and shook his head. "We have some of the world's finest geologists here," he said. "They have many ways of telling when there will be an eruption, and nobody gets too close." Despite his reassuring words, Bess continued to worry that a volcano might explode right before her eyes. It was not until they reached the delightful volcano house and she had eaten a delicious meal that she forgot her fear. After supper, the visitors from the mainland walked round the attractively planted grounds, marveling at the steam coming out of the ground in many spots. "This is the most exciting place I've ever visited," George remarked to Nancy. "I'm glad Bess got over her fright about volcanoes. I feel a little bit myself as if some trick might be played on the people round here by that goddess Pele." Ned, overhearing the remark, said he had been talking with a volcanologist from the Hawaiian National Park Service. The man had stated there was absolutely no danger. "By the way, he invited us to come over to headquarters tomorrow morning and see colored films of the most recent eruption at Mauna Loa." "Let's go," Nancy urged. When Kiaka appeared with the station wagon the next morning, Nancy told him of the invitation. The guide said by all means they must view the film and drove them to the headquarters building. For half an hour, they were captivated by one of the most fantastic motion pictures they had ever seen. Fountains of red and yellow lava were shot high into the air, then came down to run as a burning river all the way to the sea. Upon reaching water, lava and ocean met in a hissing roar, sending up volumes of steam 10,000 feet into the air. No lives were lost during this eruption, the narrator explained, but a couple of dozen buildings were, and more than a mile of highway was buried. It is estimated that 1 billion tons of lava flowed from beneath the surface of the earth. Nancy and her friends left the headquarters building awestruck by the thought of what Mother Nature can do. Kiaka drove them to the scene depicted in the film. How different it seemed now! The site was gray and harmless looking. As they drove along, the guide pointed out where the streams of lava had run down to the sea, directing their attention to the various scooped-out, cone-shaped hills. He said, "These bow-like depressions are called caldera." Finally, they came to the main crater of Mauna Loa. Standing on the edge, the group looked down into a blackish-gray depth, seamed with fissures, some narrow, some wide. "And there are the angel birds!" Nancy cried out. "Those birds," Kiaka spoke up, "are man's friends. It seems as if they have been put here for a real purpose. It's said they can detect when there is going to be an eruption and fly far away." Nancy studied their motions for a long time. She was particularly fascinated by the way they fluttered, almost like butterflies over one area, then swooped or rose and fluttered again over another area. Suddenly, the young sleuth snapped her fingers. "I think I know what Grandfather Sakamaki meant," she declared. End of chapter 18.